I'll be talking about the maturation of something called Universal Design for Learning, and that's the acronym UDL. But I'm not going to be teaching so much about UDL. It may be a new term to you, or you may be aware of it, but I'm going to be talking about UDL in a cultural context, and hopefully I'll give you some new perspectives with which to think about universal design for learning. I've been working with Universal Design for Learning since 2005, so about 20 years. And I've seen a lot of changes that have happened in education over my lifetime. As I was introduced, I have been working in special education since 1976, but with UDL for 20 years. And I'm going to be discussing 4 different areas for universal design for learning in which I've seen growth and change, and we can hopefully look forward to even more changes. So first of all, why do we even want to be talking about universal design for learning? From my perspective, there is basically a broad global desire for universal access in education. And we've heard a lot. Dr. Rose talked about a lot of the reasons for this, and I'm not going to be going into those. He did a wonderful job of identifying those. But basically, what does that mean, universal access in education? It means ensuring that all students can meaningfully participate in learning opportunities. And as we do this, we recognize that the learner's capabilities and needs vary naturally, not just students with disabilities, but all students. And that's actually one of the points that I want to emphasize about universal design for learning, that while special educators are particularly drawn to this concept because it does integrate variation in the way that we teach, variation is the norm, not the exception. All students, it's students that general educators work with in regular classrooms, also vary. And that is actually the power of universal design for learning, because it is an approach that can be used for all students, not only students with disabilities. I'm a special educator. I recognize the value of it, but it can be used with all students. And so we recognize that learners' capabilities and needs vary naturally, and they need to be considered as we plan our curriculum, as we plan what we're going to be doing within the classroom. Now, linking with the theme of our conference in terms of moving on to the intersectional experience, what I want to highlight is the importance of the development of cultural competence. This is something that I have become very, very conscious of in my years of consulting, especially in other countries. And I have an opportunity to go into classrooms and to recognize and talk with teachers such as yourself that are dealing with different issues that are different from the issues that I might be dealing with in the US. So I believe that one of the things that we need to strive for is that we develop cultural competence. And what does that mean? This is one definition. Cultural competence is the ability of a person to effectively interact, work, and develop meaningful relationships with people of various cultural backgrounds. So when we talk about a concept like universal design for learning, which was developed in the United States, which has been implemented in many ways there, in order for that approach to be effectively understood and implemented globally, and that's my focus, we really need to take into account the need for myself and others that work in this field to become culturally competent, to really understand what your needs are if I'm going to be working with you, not just to take my approach and impose it upon a situation that might be experiencing something very differently. Now, why is this important? And some of these were talked about by Dr. Rose. There are demographic shifts that have happened around the world. Globalization of societies that's been pushed forward, especially with COVID. And so COVID now pushed us to become more digitally connected. So that has globalized our societies. We have the persistence of discrimination, as Dr. Rose had talked about, as well as the persistent biases and prejudices that exist. So understanding all of those areas is part of the development of this idea of cultural competence. There's a lot of things that you can do in order to strive to be more culturally competent. I just pulled one of the ideas out that I feel is particularly relevant, and it's the art of active listening. That in order to understand individuals who come from a different background and perspective than I do, I need to carry out active listening in my understanding and the development of what I do as a teacher and a trainer and working with people. So first of all, listening for the complete meaning that people are conveying, really trying to understand what they're talking about and listening to the whole message. And not only for the teachers, but also the art of active listening with your students. What is the complete message that they are trying to convey to you when they're discussing issues within the classroom or they have difficulties? What is the full meaning of what they're trying to say? Take the time to do that. Also, trying to avoid mental distractions as we're talking about listening and listening for total meaning, pushing other things out of our mind so that we can really concentrate on what they're saying. And then the third component is offering more questions than solutions, not jumping to the solution, but inquiring, going deeper, asking questions so that then we can listen and develop our understanding of the total meaning. Now, there are many other things in that article, and you'll have this presentation available to you through me and through the conference, but this is just one idea that I wanted to share with you. So, these are the four areas that I'm going to talk about. It's just before lunch. It's a tough time to be talking, but hopefully I'll keep your attention and I'll move through these ideas. And I'm someone that is open to your inquiries while we're here or online. So if you want to know more about these things, you can always follow up with me. The first area, neuropsychology and learner variation. The second one, historical context of universal design for learning principles and guidelines. The third, the necessary contextual nature of universal design for learning implementation. And then the last one, UDL, considered as an instructional design theory. And these are areas that I feel universal design for learning has grown into and have been able to build its power for being able to be used more globally. Okay. So the first is universal design for learning as talking about it as to where it came from, the research that it came from. It is a research-based approach that was based on brain research that was done by CAST. CAST is an organization. It's now mainly online, but they existed in Massachusetts, and CAST stands for the Center for Applied Special Technology. That's what CAST originally. They worked with children like you do. And they were trying to work with these children, and they were recognizing that for some of the children, they weren't able to make the progress they wanted to. And they realized they were aware of universal design of physical environments. And what they realized was that it wasn't the child that had the difficulty, it was the environment. So they focused on trying to identify how they could move forward and change what they were doing. And so they looked at these three areas of brain research. You see the first one, recognition, and you see highlighted the area of the brain there. They looked at the strategic area of brain research, and they also looked at the affect, how people feel. So from these three areas of research, they developed what I see as the most important aspect of universal design for learning, which are the three core principles. And here you see UDL. It has its foundation in neuropsychology, and these are the three core principles from the research that CAST did on the affective area of learning. They developed this principle called multiple means of engagement. What does that mean? That means that when we're working with our children and when we are designing our instruction, we need to integrate activities, approaches, strategies that engage students in different ways. And what that does then is it helps to enhance their involvement and their attention. The second one, linked to recognition, maybe if I turn it around, is that okay? Linked to recognition is multiple means of representation. So when we think about how we are going to design our, what we're doing in the classroom, our lesson strategies, we think about all the different ways that we could represent the information, because not everybody has access to information in the same way. And all of you know this. You work with children and you work with individuals, and even yourself, you know that maybe you need to listen to things. Maybe you need to see them in pictures. Maybe you need to have, you would benefit from having video presentations and things like that. So there are a wide variety of ways that we can represent information and what we want to teach in the classroom, and that's the second principle. And then the third principle is multiple means of action and expression. What are the different ways that the child can show you what they've learned? This is often a very difficult area for teachers, because they can say, okay, I can represent this in certain ways and I might be able to get engagement, but it's the assessment that is difficult. That's coming in one way. So it's the teacher that needs to design the various choices that the child has in order to show what they know in the classroom. And that can be challenging, but that's the challenge of becoming a teacher, isn't it? There are many, many challenges, and it's a wonderful thing when we see children that can choose how to show what they've learned, right? They have some choice. And two of the concepts that I feel, basic concepts that are really important relating to universal design for learning, are creativity and choice. Bringing creativity of design, creativity of thinking into our teaching, and also building in choice. Choice for teachers and choice for the children. Okay. So I talked about variation and the fact that all children vary. Just one brief thing about the research. One of the key ideas that CAST based universal design for learning on is this idea of systematic variation, and that the variation that we have in our classrooms is not chaotic, but that it follows certain patterns, and those patterns come from the brain, the way that the brain learns. So it's predictable patterns of variability that can be used when we design learning environments. And there you see one of the key books that comes from CAST. This is one of the basic texts on universal design for learning. So this is a really key concept, this idea of systematic variation. Oh, I don't know why why is that on the screen? I don't know.
Go back once.
Okay, that's fine. Oh, that's much better. Okay, so why are patterns of variability predictable? From what CAST learned about the brain, there are three things that they highlight. The fact that neural networks are specialized, that they're composed of different specialized parts that work together. So we have variation, and our brain has specialized components, but they all work together, right? They integrate with each other. The other thing, the second point, is that they're heterarchical, meaning that they're multi-directional, that they work up and down, bottom up, side to side. So those are the connections as well. So they're specialized, they connect, and they connect in many, many different directions, right? And then the third is that they are variable, that the network functions and the reactions to stimuli are distributed in different locations for different individuals. So we have that variation as well. But in the design of the instruction, we can use that predictability to provide options for the way that we design our instruction in the classroom. So that's enough about that. So I wanted to give you an idea of what universal design for learning looks like in its materials and the growth that it's gone through. What you see here is what they call the Universal Design for Learning Guidelines Framework. This was the first one. It was first published in 2009, but it was conceptualized in the 1990s through research. You see that there are the three principles across the top: representation, multiple means of action, expression, multiple means of engagement. And below, there are three guidelines for each. And then within the guidelines, there are what they call the checkpoints. So what those guidelines and checkpoints are ideas about how you can move forward with UDL. There are different ideas for each one of the principles. And when UDL first came out, people were approaching this like, I have to do every single one of these guidelines. They were approaching it in a linear way. But UDL is actually nonlinear. And it's based upon the needs and the barriers that you see within your classroom. You can call upon this framework to get ideas as to how to address and design your instruction so that you reduce those barriers. So that is very important. I don't want you to think of this as, oh my gosh, I have to learn all of this new information and I have to do it all perfectly. It's a framework to be used effectively by yourselves to address the needs within your own classroom. So this was the first one. As CAST went forward, they said, oh, I'm not sure that representation should be first. I think engagement is more important and everything like that. And then they moved around the orientation of the guidelines and the checkpoints. But it's gone through. It's an evolving thing. It's not just set. It's gone through growth in itself. And the people who have worked in CAST recognize that their thinking started to be changing about the principles. So there was this version, and now this is the most recent version. This is UDL 3.0, and it's too small for you to read. I know that. I can't do anything about that. But you can get this at the CAST website. But if you see, there are certain areas that are outlined in blue. I outlined those areas in blue because those are the ones that CAST put together a team of individuals to talk about basically the issues of diversity and cultural variation and things like that, because they felt that their design, their framework was really only being used to address issues of disability. Now, most of you are here because of that issue, but that's not the only reason that instruction needs to be designed with variation. So they tried to bring in these other ideas, and that actually relates to this conference with the idea of the intersectional experience. So they built in welcoming interests and identities, designing options for emotional capacity, designing options for interaction. So these are some of the ways that the new framework is framed and is presented. So this is brand new. It's only about a year old. The actual impact of these changes, I'm not sure what that will be. I guess we'll see. But coming back to what I said in the beginning about universal design for learning, the most important thing I want you to take away on UDL is the three principles: multiple means of engagement, multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression. And if you just, think about that and how that might be brought into your instruction and the design of your curriculum, you'll be moving in the right direction, right? When I first started learning about universal design for learning as a special educator, I said, well, how does that relate to the other things that I know? How does UDL relate to and inform the other concepts that I know? You might be familiar with some of these. Multisensory instruction, that was originally came out by Fernald. Multiple intelligences by Howard Gardner. Differentiated instruction, Carol Tomlinson. These are all approaches or ideas. There are also some laws that, there are U.S. laws that relate to working with individuals with special needs. Mastery learning, Bloom, right? Understanding by design. These are all different approaches, but they have a relationship because those three principles, designing, multiple means of engagement, multiple means of action and expression, multiple means of representation, can help to inform the implementation of any of these. That's where I see it. That's where I see the connection between things that we already know and universal design for learning. And that's, I think, the great power of its simplicity in those three principles. Okay. Now we get to look at some more interesting things. So this is the third area that I want to talk about, which is UDL and varied cultural contexts. The examples, I have a number of different examples here, and they come from the three different books that I've co-edited with others, all about examples of inclusive instruction and UDL implementation in various places around the world. So when I was talking about cultural competence, I said that we need to take those things into account. We need to become culturally competent. And one of the places I look for to become culturally competent is to other educators around the world. You know your culture, and if you take universal design for learning and bring it into your own environment, what happens is that educators around the world develop UDL framework interpretations that address various barriers and benefits in your own community. So that's what this is. First example is actually from written by Ashna Karana. She's here at this conference. She's a graduate of SNDT. And in her work, she worked with this school. What you see here is a school that took its physical environment. They didn't have a lot of other materials, but they actually took the physical environment and created different ways of representing what the children needed to learn. So I thought this is a great example of, creativity in the way that we think about teaching in a different way. So as the children are coming in, they're actually surrounded by this learning environment. This is the second example. This comes from Dr. Radhika Khanna, who has Om Creations and now also Om Abode. And Dr. Khanna, over many years, developed this FACE program, which integrates alternative therapies, visual arts, yoga, meditation, all bringing in variation in the design of the learning. These centers are for women with adult women with developmental disabilities, but the focus is on learning and learning arts and various things like that, all on learning. And I felt this was a truly unique example of how to look at your own culture and to bring in the things that are important within that culture and integrate them within the learning environment so that individuals can reach their full potential. Okay. This example comes from Japan. Japan has other challenges. All the children in Japan need to work with the same curriculum, or the children who have significant disabilities go to special schools. And so what they're trying to do is to break that and to move towards inclusion by looking at how can they get access to the materials and the curriculum right in the classroom. So what Dr. Akuta did was to develop this technology where you take these dots and you put them actually in the workbooks. And the dots are connected to, they can be connected to pictures electronically. They can be connected to sounds, to instructions, to anything that can be programmed through this technology. So it's a simple technology, but it's what he is using, and they're using in many of the schools to modify the actual materials so that the children have access to those materials. And that's an example of how these ideas can be implemented in different ways. This fourth example is a low-tech example, and it basically was developed by researchers working in Ghana, and they wanted to find different ways of teaching mathematical concepts. So you can see the three principles across the top, and then there's access, build, and internalize. That's kind of a progression for UDL. And just developing a chart that offers ideas as to how each one of these areas, how we can help children recruit interest through low-tech models that relate to mathematical concepts. So Dr. Gronseth yesterday was talking in her technology presentation that universal design for learning can use technology, but it doesn't have to. And this is a good example of that. It's not about the technology, it's about tools that help us to do things differently so that we can design our instruction. This comes from a different book, and this example is from the Maldives. They looked at, their challenge was they didn't have an inclusive plan for education. So what they wanted to do was to develop a comprehensive systemic approach for inclusion. So they did a study gathering all the information. This is kind of what Dr. Rose was talking about, looking at things systemically and related to policy. So these changes can be directly in the classroom, or they can be throughout the system. But they looked at the legal policies, they had focus groups, they interviewed various practitioners, and then they came up with a specific focus on policy and practice so that they could move forward with their inclusive education plans. And Dr. Gronseth and I are fortunate enough to be going to visit the Maldives after this conference to talk with these individuals. And then this is the last example that I have, which is redesigning blended courses using universal design for learning. This is an example that comes from South Africa. Colleagues of mine have been working to develop these open online courses for professional development, and they wanted a course to broaden their training on disability studies. And what they did was they brought in the universal design for learning model into their professional development online open access program. They call it a short course, and it's available throughout South Africa for all of their teachers. Those are all the examples, and this is my last area, beginning to think about universal design for learning in the maturation, coming back to the focus of my talk. As it's grown, we're thinking about, what is this thing, universal design for learning? Is it just a teaching approach, or is it more than that? So myself, Dr. Gronseth, and Dr. Stefaniak worked together to look at, we had an idea that it is more than that. So as we looked into the various research and the background about instructional design, we believe that now universal design for learning embodies the key elements that are characteristic of actual instructional design theory. And the reason that we believe that is because of these next ideas. So what is a theory? A theory is a plausible or scientifically acceptable general principle or body of principles that's offered to explain a phenomena. So it's lots of different ideas put together to explain a particular concept. And so Gagne, you see here, we reference Gagne, we reference Raglith. They were kind of the fathers of instructional design theory, and we looked at their work and made the connection between their descriptions of instructional design theory and the components of universal design for learning. So this is some of our more recent work. So based upon this information, what we found is that UDL actually fulfills the characteristics by addressing these multiple variables. And these are some of the variables are situational. It's a variety of variables, but what we found is that UDL is design-oriented, that it addresses methods of instruction and factors in which those methods can be used, that it provides detailed components, which are the guidelines and the checkpoints, and also that it is it can create instructional environments likely to meet the varied needs of learning. So because of this criteria, our argument is UDL is more than just a curriculum design framework. It should actually be thought about and talked about as an instructional design theory. Now so what? What do we care about that? Why would we care about that? Because it provides power to our argument. Theories, if you think of educational theories and various theories, we base things upon theories, right? So if we can recognize that universal design for learning actually meets the criteria of an instructional design theory, we can make the argument, especially with policy makers and others, that it is really important, it's really valuable, and it's something that other things can be based on. It's like systematic change. So just to recap a little bit, we recognize that systematic variation of UDL. I talked about considering the cultural context of the universal design for implementation, and finally, understanding UDL as instructional design theory. So here we go. So I do have a number of different resources, and if you can get that through the presentation. And that's all I have to say right now. I'll be available for questions throughout the conference. So thank you so much for your attention. Really, thank you for your attention.